Welcome to Inca News 2022. I'm Rhea Daniels from Hatchet Lake First Nations.
And I'm Michelle Crook from Hay River, Northwest Territories.
Inca News is produced by students in the Indigenous Communication Arts Summer Institute.
The Summer Institute is a 6-week journalism course. It's offered every second year at the First Nations University of Canada in beautiful Regina, Saskatchewan.
This year, the First Nations University powwow happened during the Summer Institute, so we have some great stories for you.
But before we get to the powwow, we have some stories about broadcasting, podcasting, and filmmaking.
We also have stories about cannabis, beading, publishing, and reclaiming culture.
It's going to be a great show, so grab some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy.
Live on Beat Production, 3, 2, 1.
For the last 6 weeks, B. Bird has been immersed in the world of journalism through the Indigenous Communication Arts Program, also known as Inca. The program is offered at the First Nations University of Canada in Regina. B., who is from Montreal Lake, is taking part in the Summer Institute.
It feels great. It feels awesome. I'm learning a lot more. I'm making new friends.
He joined the program to improve his writing skills and tell Indigenous stories.
I believe that it's important to have more Indigenous storytellers out there.
The Inca Summer Institute is a crash course in all things journalism. Students hone their skills in print, radio, and broadcast journalism. The program offers many opportunities for hands-on learning. B was able to put his training to use at the latest powwow in Regina. Nelson Bird is the assignment editor at CTV Regina. He is also the host and producer of the weekly series Indigenous Circle. He took the Inca program around 30 years ago. As an Inca alumni, he returns as a mentor in hopes of recruiting future journalists.
Inca is a great stepping stone for future journalists. It really opens eyes, and I really highly recommend it because it changed my career. It changed my direction in life.
He says there is still a lack of Indigenous representation in mainstream media.
I hope that for the future that we see that changes. We see that we aren't the minority in newsrooms across Canada, because right now we totally are.
Nelson says Indigenous representation is crucial to a newsroom. He says that when Indigenous people are included, they are able to bridge the gap between cultures.
But we know that we can count on each other regardless of our history of who we are, where we come from, but we work as a team.
Most importantly, he says Indigenous people bring their sense of humor and care.
We laugh a lot because they do too. So that's one of the things that bridges us together, is that sense of humor.
While the need for more journalists is urgent, Nelson is hopeful for the future.
It's a great career if somebody wants to pursue this. Just go in with an open mind and an open heart, and you'll go a long way.
The Inca Summer Institute is offered every second year from May to June. Inca offers multiple programs like a 1-year certificate, a 2-year diploma, and are in the developing stages of a bachelor's program. For Inca News, I'm Nicole Garn.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to know that there's so many opportunities for us when we graduate.
I had the opportunity to speak with a more recent graduate, Jennifer Francis. Jennifer completed her Inca diploma in 2020 and a Bachelor of Journalism degree in 2022.
Jennifer did her Inca internship at CBC and is now working for CBC full-time.
Jennifer Francis has always wanted to be a journalist. It's a career path that some in her family have already taken. Francis found the skills she needed to move into journalism full-time at First Nations University of Canada, where she enrolled in the Indigenous Communication Arts program.
I felt like when I went into the journalism program, I knew worlds more than my peers. By the time I started the journalism program, I was already working at CBC. I was already a professional journalist at that point. And then the program, the journalism program was really good. It taught me a lot, but I felt like I had a stronger base, a stronger foundation than those who didn't take Inca.
Francis looks back at her time in Inca with fond memories and a sense of pride.
I remember the pressure, I remember the nerves, I remember being like in my little shell and not really being able to talk to anybody. And then Inca really just brought that out, and it has helped me significantly. And even just everyday conversations, like even just like coming out of my shell and making small talk and stuff like that. I wouldn't have been able to do that without the foundations of Inca, I believe. So
Frances gives this advice to other new journalists starting out.
Save everything that you write. Really practice, even just like every day, if you want to be an on-air talent, just practice. Like if you're reading a book, just practice and be like presenting it as if you're in front of a camera, in front of a microphone, just to sort of get that presentation. Record yourself talking a lot so you can see what you sound like.
Frances is ready to start working, but first comes graduation.
I'm ecstatic. I feel like I've been in school forever, and now I'm working full-time over the summer, applying for full-time positions at CBC, so I feel like I finally actually get to focus only on journalism and no more like quizzes or exams or like assignments I have to do, so yeah, I'm very excited.
Frances eventually wants to get a master's degree and start teaching. For Inca News, I'm Michaela Crook.
Jennifer is so inspiring, and radio looks like so much fun.
Did you know that 30 years ago, students in the Inca program started CFNU, Canada's First Nations University radio station?
CFNU only lasted a year, but in 2022, it's back. Michael Shortingbear talked to one of the students who started the radio station, an Inca instructor who helped.
The First Nations University of Canada, formerly known as the Saskatchewan Inuit Federal College, was home to Canada's first Aboriginal university-run radio station. It ran for just a year before it went off the air. This year, staff and students are hoping to bring it back. Shannon Avison is the Indigenous Communication Arts instructor at the First Nations University of Canada. She got to experience CFNU in its prime.
CFNU, the original CFNU, was created in 1994 when First Nations University was SIFC, and we were in a little trailer outside College West.
CFNU was run outside College West and gave students hands-on experience that was hard to find elsewhere.
I think it's really important that students have an opportunity not just to produce things for class, but to actually share them. And I'm really a firm believer that hands-on, learning by doing is a really good way to learn. And so it really gives people an opportunity to try their hand at things and also to develop, shows and programming that becomes part of their portfolio.
Students who were there in the early days took their skills beyond the radio booth. Cree journalist Nelson Bird is the assignment editor for CTV Regina. He was a part of the group who advocated for the station.
We also had opportunity to utilize this equipment, the reel-to-reel, the buttons, the headphones, the microphone, and I just thought this is kind of cool.
Nelson looks back fondly on his time running CFNU.
We had a meeting, we had a bunch of students get together, and we brainstormed all these ideas and what we can do and how we can make Indigenous radio culturally relevant to the university, and it would be heard throughout the university.
First Nations University Radio is planning to return to the air this fall with a new group of students. For Inca News, this is Michael Shortingbear.
Thanks, Michael. What a great opportunity for students to get experiencing in broadcasting.
CFNU will be available online and on the air this fall.
That's so exciting. Community radio plays such an important role in communities.
In Williams Lake, BC, there's a radio station that's celebrating 5 years on the air. Racine Jeff is an Inca student and the manager of Socoton Radio.
Racine produced this story about her own radio station.
I got nothing.
Thanks, Racine. It's great to see how community radio keeps people informed and entertained.
And community radio is important for preserving language and culture.
That's right. And there's another project that's preserving languages right here in Saskatchewan.
The Pikiskwewin Podcast Project is funded by Canadian Heritage. Podcasters are trained to do programs in all of the Saskatchewan languages.
Emily Wren talked with one of the Pikiskwewin podcasters.
Natalie
Langan is a native Saulteaux speaker. She hosts the Akani Nakanatan podcast for Pikiskwewin, a family of podcasts designed to help revitalize Indigenous languages. Akani Nakanatan means leadership in the Saulteaux language. It's also the focus of her podcast.
Because I grew up in such a traditional environment, I was raised by many different family members who were really involved in their culture and tradition and their language and various types of jobs. And so I wanted to know what leadership meant to them in any capacity. Who did they look up to? How did they get to where they are now? What kind of guidance was given to them?
Langan was raised by her grandmother in Fishing Lake First Nation, a community northeast of Regina. She learned Soto as her first language since her grandmother did not speak English. Her grandmother raised Langan alongside her cousins, where they learned many traditional ways of living.
At the time, you know, when you're that young, you don't think that it's anything different. That was just the way of life.
Shannon Avison is the supervisor for Pekiskwewin. She is also an assistant professor at First Nations University of Canada, where the project is based. She says she wants to create content in Indigenous languages with hosts like Langan.
The project is really to create content, a variety of content in Indigenous languages. So when we were sort of looking around, we realized that there's lots of podcasts about, Indigenous culture, even about Indigenous languages, but none of them are in the Indigenous languages. And so that's what we wanted to do, was create actual podcasts talking about things like leadership and parenting and food sovereignty in the languages.
Langan says that the experience has been challenging but rewarding.
It was because, personally going back to, I guess, my childhood and not being as fluent as I used to be. So, and that's why I say it was a challenge, because I basically had to relearn. I had to remember a lot about my language, my history, my culture, and, go back to those roots.
Langan dedicates the podcast to her grandmother.
Whenever I hear the language, especially when I go back home, that's what it reminds me of. That's what it makes me feel. It makes me feel at home. It's really comforting. It's soothing. When I put myself back in that environment, my mind just knows what to do. It knows how to understand those words. It knows how to feel comfortable, and that's what that means to me.
Pekiskwewin releases new episodes every week of both new and running series. Episodes can be found on any podcast platform and the Pekiskwewin website. For Inca News, I'm Emily Wren.
Pekiskwewin, Pekiskwewin, Pekiskwewin. I think I got it.
Practice makes perfect. That's why it's no surprise that Connie Walker's latest podcast is so good.
Connie Walker took the Inca Summer Institute almost 25 years ago.
In 1998, Connie did her Inca internship at CBC. When podcasting became a thing, she started a CBC podcast series called Missing and Murdered.
Rolling Stone magazine said Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo was one of the best true crime podcasts of 2018.
This year, Connie released another true crime podcast. It's about her own family in Saskatchewan.
Stolen, Surviving St. Michael's is about the impact of residential schools on Connie's father.
Listening to it helped another residential school survivor understand the ways that residential schools impacted her and her family.
Rebecca Fight has that story for us.
Carrie Benja was the managing editor of Eagle Feather News. She is a fourth-generation residential school survivor.
Our survivors, like my mother's 82, and she's never talked about her experience. She shared one story. She said when she was 5 that when her dad took her there, she said it was the place where she learned to cry.
Benjo feels it's her duty as an Indigenous reporter to share what happened at residential schools and what was taken away, to maintain her family's identity.
As a last-generation residential school survivor, I'm speaking not only for myself, but for my parents who never had a chance, for my grandparents that I never met, and for my great-grandparents who were the first to be affected by residential schools.
In recent years, the history of residential schools has been in the forefront, with the discovery of unmarked graves at sites across the country. Survivors' truths are also shared in podcasts.
You might recognize the name Connie Walker. She's a Cree journalist that worked at CBC for over 20 years and hosted the podcast Missing and Murdered. She now produces and hosts the podcast Stolen for Gimlet Media. The new season focuses on her family's experience at St. Michael's Residential School.
In the 1970s, my dad was a police officer in rural Saskatchewan. One night, while out on patrol, he saw a car swerving on the road and he pulled it over. When he walked up to the window, he recognized the man behind the wheel.
As being one of the priests that, and he said, one of the priests that abused him in residential school. And he ended up taking him out of the vehicle and beating the shit out of him.
This story brought me home to a mystery in my own family that I need to solve.
Walker said she had very little knowledge of her family's history at St. Michael's before making the podcast.
I knew almost nothing about my dad's experience. I knew that he had gone to a residential school, that he was a survivor, but that was essentially all I knew. I didn't know where he went or for how long or when or how old he was or how long he was there. This has been such an incredible learning journey for me about my dad and his life.
Benjo has listened to the podcast. She relates to what Walker went through as a child.
My dad was very quick to anger. There was no praise. There was no, affection. There was no hugs. There was no one reading me bedtime stories other than my sisters at the time.
Benjo found it hard to listen to Walker's story, but she says it's important for these stories to be memorialized.
I've listened to it with my youngest daughter because I feel it's really important for me as the last generation to actually experience a residential school, to pass down as much stories as I can to the next generation, because I think this history is really important.
Rebecca Feit, Inca News.
Thanks for that story, Rebecca. You can find Connie's Stolen podcast on Spotify.
Next, Jolene Kakwaitaway talked with filmmaker Peter Brass about his latest project, a film about fathers.
Peter Brass wears many hats. He is an art collection manager at the First Nations University of Canada. He also has a passion for writing, directing, and filmmaking.
My name is Peter Brass. I'm from Pekingese First Nations, and I have 2 kids.
With his latest project, he's merging 2 of his most important jobs. Brass produced a short documentary called Indigenous Dads.
I made this film because I had been having the similar conversation with various other parents, and it was a reoccurring subject, so I figured there was something there to look into.
The 11-minute piece looks at the experience of Indigenous dads of today.
Becoming parents, we were faced with our own issues, and I don't want my kids growing up like me, that kind of overriding thing. So I thought that was a positive. It was because I've bettered myself in order to help them.
Brass interviewed 3 other fathers who live in Saskatchewan.
Some of the topics that we discussed in the documentary were our personal histories as children growing up, and how we were parented, how we translated those experiences to our own children. If you're lucky enough, you will realize that you probably have a lot of healing to do yourself.
The film also explored timely topics, including missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, racial profiling, and the justice system. The men in the documentary speak candidly about how becoming a parent impacted them in a positive way.
I think it's important to talk about the experience of parenthood. And generally, men, I've noticed, myself included, don't talk about a lot of intimate stuff and their feelings. And so I think it's important that to show that it's a masculine trait to be honest and open and vulnerable.
You can view the documentary on APTN, CBC Gem, and the Documentary Channel. For Inca News, I'm Jolene Kakwaitaway.
That was so heartwarming. I'm gonna go call my dad as soon as we're done. Hi, Dad. Hi, Dad. That's it for us. Keep watching to meet more Inca students and hear more stories.
Welcome back to Inca News 2022. I'm Jolene Kakwetwe from Regina.
And I'm Crystal Green from Winnipeg.
Our first story is from Eric Standing. He visited the Regina Police to find out what they're doing to keep cannabis-impaired drivers off the street.
It prints our results out right after the test.
It only takes 9 minutes and a swab for police to figure out if you are under the influence of cannabis. This is one of the tools police use to determine if someone is under the influence. It is the Sotoxa mouth swab test for cannabis impairment. Corporal Andre Sieber is with the Regina City Police. She's an impairment specialist. Sieber wants people to know that they can be charged with DWI for smoking cannabis and driving.
Whenever we have an impairing substance, we want to make sure that we're keeping our roads safe. And so we test for cannabis impairment on drivers who we suspect have used cannabis recently. So one of the ways that we do that is through a Sotoxa, which is an oral fluid device. It's been approved, obviously, by the federal government for us to use. And it's become a valuable tool for us. It's very convenient for us to take it roadside. And if we have suspicion that somebody has used cannabis recently, then we would give them an oral fluid demand, and then we would test them on this device.
Sieber says that police use roadside sobriety checks for slow reaction times and balance. If a person fails the roadside check or it is obvious they have been using cannabis, then they can expect a mouth swab test. The Regina Police mouth swab test can only detect a cannabis level 5 times higher than the legal limit. But these tests can detect cannabis up to 6 hours after use, depending on how much was used. That sets up a legal problem. Jack Lloyd is a criminal lawyer practicing in Toronto. He specializes in cannabis and psychedelics. He says that there is a difference between being physically impaired and being legally impaired.
What makes me concerned, and it concerns many people, is the fact that someone could be found statutorily guilty of impairment, and they could be convicted criminally. They could be, potentially jailed over that issue, when in fact they are not impaired. They have not consumed any impairing substances, and they are driving safely.
I decided to put it to the test and try it myself. I volunteered to be tested. I had smoked cannabis 12 hours prior to the test.
This is showing us that in your oral fluid right now, you're exceeding the legal limit.
I failed the test. Had that been a roadside test, I could expect to lose my license for anywhere from 3 days to a year, depending on the circumstances. It should be noted that the swab I used was an expired one that the police use for examples. Corporal Sieber says the Regina Police are aware of the inconsistencies between physical and legal intoxication. She says that the roadside sobriety tests are supposed to compensate for those inconsistencies. For Inca News, this is Eric standing on the road.
Thanks, Eric. Even though cannabis is legal now, it still has to be consumed responsibly.
That's right. Looking out for each other is an important value in Indigenous cultures.
But a lot of Indigenous people have moved away from their home communities and lost touch with their traditional teachings.
Dallas Montpetit brings us a story about a group of urban Indigenous women who were able to relearn their cultural teachings in a program called Kotaway.
Smudge first, and then you can smudge everybody else, remember?
This mother is teaching her children their culture and ceremony.
Ever since I started going to ceremony and changing my way of teaching my children, we do that every morning. We smudge. I'll light they'll get the sage ready, they'll roll it up, and then I'll light it for them, and then he goes, or she'll go and smudge everybody in the home.
That's Willow Warrior 1. She is part of a program called Kotaway, Start a Fire. It's led by All Nations Hope Network in Treaty 4 territory. The 7 women in the program are called the Willow Warriors. An elder gave them this name in ceremony.
When I first started the program, I was dealing with a lot of depression, suicidal thoughts, and it brought me to these women, to my sisters, bring me to them, and to be able to open up, to be able to trust other women, to be able to connect with them, and I know that I'm not alone.
Kotaway helps urban Indigenous women reclaim their cultural ceremonies. Through the 5-year program, the women support each other and find healing physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
I've been clean. I've been sober. I've been working on myself a lot, and through ceremony. Every sweat lodge that I go to, I'm constantly praying for my family and for our community and for our knowledge keepers.
The Willow Warriors have participated in teepee raising, medicine picking, and sunrise ceremonies that can be passed down to their children. They have also made ceremonial items to help them throughout their healing journey. Carolyn Pelchier is a community-based research navigator for Kotoway. She shares a bit about the women involved.
Some of them went to residential school, some of them come from the 60s scoop, some of them were in foster care. A lot of them have not been connected to culture, such as myself. I did not know my cultural or my tradition. I knew a little bit about it, but that was our main focus, was to get land-based teachings and tradition back in our circle.
The women are starting to gain recognition by sharing their gifts at events in community.
We just recently went and sang at Albert School for some educators, and it was a really powerful time. We were able to share our story and sing our songs for them. We've been gifted a healing song, and it's beautiful to sing with the Willow Warriors, but it's also beautiful to hear the feedback after we're done singing and people coming and saying that was beautiful and we'd like to hear you again.
Carolyn hopes that this project can expand and help more community members who have a desire to get well. I'm Dallas Maupetit for Inca News.
That's such a sweet story. Thanks, Dallas.
Preserving Indigenous traditions is important, but traditions can evolve.
In April, the Mackenzie Art Gallery opened a new exhibit called Radical Stitch. They say it's the most significant exhibition of contemporary Indigenous beading in North America. Amber Bear talked with Sherry Farrell-Rissette, one of the curators of the exhibit.
There's amazing, amazing work that's being created.
This isn't your typical beadwork.
Seems like every year people are like raising the bar.
Sherry Farrell-Rissette is one of 3 curators who organized this exhibit, Radical Stitch, which is at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina. This exhibit is showcasing beadwork in a contemporary way.
Getting blown away by the beauty and the respect and awe that every bead here is hand-stitched, sometimes one bead at a time. And so just the labor and the vision, is just mind-blowing.
Radical Stitch is aimed to inspire. The show has over 100 pieces that are created by 48 Indigenous artists from all over Turtle Island. One piece that stood out to Rissette is this cradle board that tells many stories.
The Ganawagi cradle boards are really unique. They're really unique. And if you look at the back is really elaborately carved. And that idea of honoring that space between a mother and an infant, to me, is beautiful. People have been moved, deeply moved, in a positive way.
Rissette says beadwork is not only a craft, but a fine art, just like any other medium.
Our point here is that this is not craft. That's our, we just wanted to kick that idea completely to the curb.
And this unique work is getting a lot of attention.
You could tell the way people were leaning in, that they were seeing themselves, that they were seeing and having recognized, oh, that's why it feels like that, because that's what's going on.
Radical Stitch is on until August 28th, and curators are working on bringing it to other cities. For Inca News, I'm Amber Bear.
Thanks for that great story, Amber. The Radical Stitch show ends on August 28th.
As soon as we're done here, I'm heading to the Mackenzie Art Gallery.
Our last story in this part of the show is about a professor at First Nations University who has been developing teaching materials for Cree language instructors for many years.
This spring, Solomon Rapp published a new textbook called Akima Naheoatan, Let's Keep Speaking Cree. Chance Denayou was at the book launch at the First Nations University.
Kyle?
Thanks, Chance. There's so much good work being done here to preserve Indigenous languages.
Actually, Solomon Ratt was awarded the Order of Merit for Saskatchewan for the work he has done to support language teachers.
And the cool thing about that is the Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, the Honorable Russell Morasti, is also a Cree speaker.
I bet that's the first time the Saskatchewan Award of Merit was bestowed in Cree.
I bet you're right. So we're making progress.
We are making progress, and we're progressing through our show too.
We have one more series of stories for our Inca News fans.
And we've saved the most colorful stories to the end.
Be prepared to be dazzled and amazed at the First Nations University Annual Powwow.
Back after almost 3 years.
Stay tuned, there's so much more to see.
Welcome back. I'm Rebecca Feit from Saskatoon.
And I'm Eric Standing on the Road from Muskogee, Alberta.
First Nations University has hosted an annual powwow in Regina for over 40 years, but it was canceled in 2020 and again in 2021.
But in June 2022, our powwow was back. It was smaller than usual, but people are excited to be back together again.
Memory McLeod talked with powwow chairperson Robin Morin.
We want to say thank you to our elder generation for being on hand to advise.
After a long hiatus, the sounds of drums and jingles rang loud during the First Nations University of Canada's Spring Powwow. For the first time since 2019, the university was able to host its annual celebrations. Committee co-chair Robin Morin was happy to see people gather to dance and sing again.
So powwow is a way of life for me.
Morin is a member of Saddle Cree Nation in central Alberta. Powwow has been a way of life for her since she was 10 years old. After graduating from First Nations University, she was able to bring teachings and an understanding to the university's powwow committee.
I do have some teachings I've received over the years and just that personal connection with powwow.
Morin says there was a smaller crowd this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee was unsure if a powwow were to happen this year after the 3-year break. Morin says the committee had to secure a location in a short amount of time and contend with other events. But organizers were determined to make it happen.
We did experience some challenges. Thankfully, we were able to get through that. But you know, coming out of a pandemic, there's always uncertainties. But in the past, we do a really great job of planning for at least 10 months.
Even with smaller numbers, organizers were still happy with the turnout. Morin says the cancellation of ceremonies during the pandemic was difficult for the powwow community.
As Indigenous people, we connect with one another. We don't approach things in an individualistic way. We're community-based. We need those social interactions. So the last couple of years with not dancing powwow in the summer, it was really isolating and lonely. So to be able to gather once again in the city of Regina on Treaty 4 territory and have individuals from all over, Canada and the United States come to our celebration was just so overwhelming.
She says she is thankful to gather with family and friends once again.
It was just this, gratitude, joy, happiness. Like my spirit was just so happy to hear the drums and see the tiny tots dancing and see the veterans and the elders visiting and smiling.
For Inca News, I'm Memory McLeod.
Thanks, Memory. Our First Nations University powwow is a competition powwow with big prize money.
So keeping track of points is important.
It used to be done by hand, but now it's digital.
The First Nations University hired C&T Tabulating to keep track of all the dancers and all the competitions.
Rhea Daniels talked to Tammy Stonestand, the T in C&T Tabulating.
These dancers are checking in for the First Nations University of Canada Spring Powwow. With a quick scan, each dancer is registered. This contemporary method is changing up the traditional way of celebrating First Nations culture. Tammy Stonestand and her husband Clayton Crane are the brains behind C&T Tabulating.
We were the first one to establish this business, but there is, I think, 1 or 2 other people that are starting their own. So we were the very first in North America to create this business.
C&T Tabulating was created in 2006. Its purpose to speed up the process of calculating competition points.
With the time efficiency, when we first started, powwows were ending at 3, 4 in the morning because of tabulations being handwritten, and I think it's changed it, but the technology.
Stone Stan was a dancer before meeting Crane. They created C&T tabulating together. Stone Stan knew the powwow circuit, and Crane knew the technical side.
So we put it together, and then we used to do powwows for free, and then we started offer our services to them to try. So we did, and then about 5 years later, it just started taking off more and more.
Stone Stan and Crane offer their services to First Nations powwows yearly.
We attend about 40 some powwows. We just basically add up all the points and the point system. We don't do any of the judging, we just add up the point system for committees.
But business slowed down during the pandemic. Stone Stan says she was grateful for the time being spent with family, but she's happy to be back on the trail.
Now that we're coming back, it's really good to see everyone and to be in there. It's like feels like home.
C&T tabulating will be hitting up the powwow trail for the rest of the season. For Inca News, this is Rhea Daniels.
Thanks for that story, Rhea.
A highlight of the powwow is the selection of a powwow princess. This year, Reagan Alexis Isnana was crowned.
Reagan is an Indigenous social work student. B-Bird talked to Reagan about what it took to become a powwow princess.
Thanks for that great story, B, and congratulations to Reagan Isnana.
She's going to have a busy year, representing First Nations University at powwows across the country.
I know she'll make us proud.
But not everyone can attend powwows in person, and lots of non-Indigenous people are shy to attend. So Wendy Whitebear brought the powwow right into their living rooms.
Wendy hosted a live powwow event on Access Communications. Christina Gervais talked to Wendy Whitebear about her experience.
The First Nations University of Canada held its first powwow in 2 years on June 4th and 5th. Wendy Whitebear volunteered to host a live broadcast of the powwow on community television in Regina.
Well, one, I love Access because they really try to promote the First Nations University powwow. I think the most important thing for me is the majority of the people that are watching Access are non-Indigenous people. And we're really trying to let people know you want to learn about our culture, you want to learn about our people. One of the best places to do that is at the powwow. And a lot of people have the misconception that powwows are just for First Nations people or Indigenous people. But we want people to know that come down, come for a couple hours, come, embrace our community and our celebration and, the beauty of our culture. And if you want to get to know us, that's one great place to get to know us. And, if you're really interested in doing reconciliation, great place to start. It was the first time recording the powwow, and it was the first time I ever did a live. So it was kind of a little bit weird because I was standing in the middle of a raised stage and I was talking to the air. Well, actually I had 5 crew members and 1 producer. I have a lot of respect for crew. They put it, when you have a big crew like that, it's not big, but it's a larger crew. And they're in there 2.5 hours before the actual airing of the show because they got a lot of work to do. And it's only on Access. You can't get it on any other channel.
Thanks, Christina. Wendy also volunteers as a host of a show called The Four on Access.
Do you know that's the first time Wendy ever did a live show?
That's amazing. What a natural.
You can watch the recorded show on Access Communication. Check your local listing to find out when you can watch it again and again and again.
Across Turtle Island, Two-Spirit people are finding acceptance in the powwow circle. Crystal Green spoke with jingle dress dancer Gail Pruden about her journey to find herself as a Two-Spirit person and find a place in the powwow circle.
Powwow season and Pride Month celebrations have kicked off, and Two-Spirit people are being honored in the powwow circle. The term Two-Spirit often refers to someone who embodies masculine and feminine qualities. Gail Pruden is a jingle dress dancer who's been at it for almost 25 years. She recalls being a spectator at her first powwow in Winnipeg.
Oh, that was so beautiful. I had that connection right there with the drum, the grandfather drum.
Pruden hasn't always been so confident. It took her a while to get to this point.
So dirty, I felt like I wasn't worthy to go into the arbor.
Pruden revealed her true identity when she was in a CBC documentary about two-spirit dancers.
And it was funny how they didn't know about my gender. I never realized how much people I'd be helping with the secret.
She was honored by the Manitowabi Festival in Winnipeg. She was there to encourage new dancers in the first ever Two-Spirit Special.
I've been practically begging Manitowabi for us to do the special for about 5, 6, 7 years.
After Winnipeg, the Powwow Trail led Pruden to the first annual Two-Spirit Powwow in Toronto. She believes these events are part of a growing trend.
It's quite the movement. It's so beautiful to see that the inclusion of Two-Spirit is so important that it continues to grow and go on.
The COVID-19 pandemic canceled the annual First Nations University of Canada powwow for the last 2 years. The Student Council at FNU hosted a Two-Spirit streetwear special, which was a first.
A lot of the powwow from colonization has been very gendered. Men's chicken dance, women's fancy shawl.
The students wanted the powwow to be more gender inclusive and open to those without an outfit.
Okay, let's have a Two-Spirit streetwear special. Regalia is expensive. It's a privilege to have nice, beautiful beadwork. The courage it took for all these dancers to come and do that. That was beautiful to honor us like that.
Did you dance today?
I danced, and actually it was my first time dancing. Actually started to tear up. It was very emotional.
As a youth worker, Monroe knows why powwows need to be more inclusive.
Not being accepted into our Indigenous culture, it really causes that identity crisis. Like, where are we accepted? Where are we going to be loved? So I just think it's so important for our youth to be able to be welcomed back into the circle again.
More of these Two-Spirit specials will be held throughout the rest of the powwow season. One of the events in Couchiching, Ontario has made a call of donations for Two-Spirit people without access to their own regalia. For Inca News, I'm Crystal Green.
Thanks, Crystal. What an inspiring story.
It's so nice to know that everyone is welcome in the powwow circle.
And we have come full circle to the end of our 2022 Inca Summer Institute television special.
Before we go, we want to remember our friend Mercedes Redman.
Mercedes was an Inca student in 2020. She was completing a Bachelor of Journalism degree, but she came back to help us in the Inca Summer Institute.
Mercedes passed away on May 27th, 2022.
We want to dedicate our show to Mercedes Redman. She was a wonderful friend and mentor.
She was generous and kind, but also mighty and fierce, especially when she was telling stories about our Indigenous people.
We are going to miss her.
That's our show. Thanks to everyone who taught us for the last 6 weeks.
Our instructors came from media organizations across Canada. Peter Skinner came from CBC North.
Tamara Pimentel came to us from APTN, and Brittany Hobson came from Canadian Press.
Stuart Manhas came from Global Television.
Betty Ann Adam and Carrie Benjo came to us from Post Media and Eagle Feather News.
Paul Dornsdottir and Jennifer Francis came from CBC Television.
Nelson Bird came from CTV.
Our Inca professors are Shannon Avison, Patricia Elliott, and Audrey Drever.
That's a lot of people.
For sure. It was an amazing 6 weeks. Crazy busy and crazy fun.
I learned a lot.
Thanks for watching our show. If you want to know more about the Inca program or the First Nations University of Canada, you can find us at fnuniv.ca.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks from all of us.